There's a place that I would love to visit in Dorset called Netherton Stanley. Above the village, on a hill, is a plinth with a giant puma made of stone, local stone up there. And it has a legend attached to it, which I find is fascinating. For the legend says that I think in the early part of the 1800s, there was a squire who was interested in collecting exotic plants, and he went abroad and brought these tropical plants back, which he kept in his garden. On one trip, he came back with a puma, a living, breathing puma, which he kept in a cage and would exercise in his yard at the back on a long chain. And when he wanted to bring the cat back into the cage, he would have this chain pulled in, winched in, I think, and so that the cat was forced back into the cage. Well, the villagers of Netherton Stanley were a little upset, shall we say, perturbed, and feared that this cat might escape and cause problems in the village. So the squire thought the best way to rectify this situation was to prove that the puma was actually quite benign, tame even. So he would allow people into his garden and they would look inside the cage and see the cat quietly sitting there. And he would even allow children to feed the cat through a special mechanism of one door opening, placing a bowl of food, whatever that would have consisted of, and then another door opening beyond after the first door had been shut. And this sort of quelled the villagers quite a bit, but there was still rumblings that it was a little bit out of the ordinary to have this cat. This troubled the squire, and eventually he figured the best way to really demonstrate that this cat, whilst a wild and dangerous animal overseas, over here was quite tame, was to invite a few dignitaries and to venture into the cage himself with some food, which he did. And the puma is said to have been reclining quite casually at one end of the cage when the squire entered through the door and placed the food down. But no sooner had he placed the food down did the cat leap up, brutally attack the squire, digging a claw right into his neck, causing fatal injuries, which he died of a few days later, and escaping through the door. Well, of course, you can imagine the bystanders there were absolutely terrified and unable to do anything other than pull out the poor body of the dying man. The cat escaped over the wall of the property and bounded into the heathland beyond. There was huge consternation from the villagers, as you can well believe, and it was demanded, in fact, that people went out with guns to try and track this animal because, of course, there was a lot of fear in the community. Gunmen did go out on horseback nervously in search of this cat, but they couldn't find it. It had seemed to have gone, and as the weeks went past, it seemed that the cat had left the area completely and had perhaps gone into another county. And so people started to relax and things began to get back to normal. That was until the peddler's death came about. A peddler who had been on an ancient track passing the village had been discovered with terrible injuries to him, as if some animal had clawed away at him, killing him rather brutally. Of course, the villagers got very upset about this, and then the nerves came about. It was deemed that they still had to go back out and hunt for this killer animal. So more of the men from the village got together with their guns and off they went. And it took about a week before they actually managed to track down the puma and shoot it, killing it dead, and they brought it back. Well, there was a lot of disbelief that the animal was really dead. People from all around, from some of the local towns, had come in and were demanding to see the corpse. So they decided to have the corpse taken to the local taxidermist and stuffed, where it was placed then in a large glass cabinet with a curtain around it. This was taken into the village hall and exhibited for several months so that people could come along and have a look at the gruesome sight of this horrible animal. And in fact, one of the other dignitaries, a landowner, decided not only that this was good for business, and built a stone plinth on the top of the hill with a depiction of the puma in the local stone up there, and it became known as the Netherton Cat. And there it stood for several years. Well, as the years went past and the people went on, eventually interest in the cat sort of declined. The village hall had other uses it needed to do, and this cabinet was placed down in the cellar or in some other back room or out of the way, wherever. And that was that. And now it seems that there had been newspaper reports from several years later that in the area there was mysterious noises at night, and people were slightly nervous, thinking it was some sort of ghost. Others were convinced that the cat was roaming out there. And then there was the news report of a much loved shepherd who had been found in a ditch with the same sort of horrible, brutal injuries that the peddler had some several years earlier. He had been attacked and was covered in blood. And then another traveller passing by the village, who knew nothing of this, came running into the village with blood dripping on him, horrifying a lot of the women and the children. And when questioned, he was saying that a horrible black misty monster was out there onto the heathland and had attacked him. He survived, but he sort of had gone completely out of his mind. The villagers were getting more anxious, and somebody said, no, it can't be the cat, for the cat, the puma, is dead. We know that, we have it. And so somebody was then sent into the back room or the cellar or wherever this cabinet had been kept to bring it back out. He brought the cabinet back into the main village hall. The villagers gathered round to peer at it, and he pulled back the curtains, only to find that the glass had broken and the mummified remains of the puma had gone.